Hello everyone, my name is Tim, probably better known as Extrutim. At least if you own a 3D printer and have been on printables, you might have already seen one or the other of my designs. I'm always working on 3D printing projects and I thought maybe it's a cool idea to make a video of this one. This is my very first YouTube video, so excuse my English and my horrible German accent while I figure out how to make a decent video. So I was sitting here in my living room as usual as I realized that I still have some space for a small table next to the sofa. I actually wanted to build a table like this for a long time now. I wanted to have a place at the entrance to the living room where I can put this little remote control for my lamps, for example. So far it has been living on the armrest of my sofa, which I don't really like. From the remaining wood from which I built my living room table, I never uploaded these legs by the way, I've already built a matching tabletop for this corner. At that time I didn't have the idea to make a video out of it, so unfortunately I don't have any footage of me making this plate. However, I wasn't yet sure what to build under this plate. I thought just 4 legs is too boring. For this reason the plate stood behind the sofa for a few months now. So now I had the idea, can't I just print a whole piece of furniture? How well does it work considering that all the parts have to fit on my 3D printer? Reason enough to give it a try.
First of all, of course, I had to construct the whole thing. The furniture will end up being about 50 cm high, 46 cm deep and 26 cm wide. As I have a large print bed with my XL, I didn't have to worry so much about the size of the individual parts. Of course, I still had to split up the large parts. These are then fitted with the heat inserts and screwed together. So this is a finished design. If we hide the insides, you can see how the parts are joined together. The edges run along the outside of the triangles. Straight edges would spoil the look too much. Inside are the 2 drawers, which are printed black simply for contrast. They are also divided into 2 parts and are each screwed to the front with 4 threaded rods running through the whole side of the drawer. This should hold everything together securely. There are also some holes on the sides of the heat inserts. I have 2 different pullouts and have copied the holes from them in the hope that other pullouts will also have some of the same holes, which is often the case. The back contains these 2 large compartments that I want to fill with gravel for additional weight so that the lightweight plastic furniture is stable and doesn't tip over when there's some weight in the drawers. There are also 2 holes at the top and bottom through which I can run cables if a lamp or a charging pad find its place on top. By the way, these holes are also made in classic furniture so that air can escape from the cabinet when the drawers are closed. However, this is less necessary with self-closing pullouts. The underside is also connected with 2 screws and there are also printed rubber pads underneath that I can vary in height as the floor will certainly not be 100% straight. Under the rubber pads are also holes for the screws with which the base plate is attached to the sides. As you may have already seen, the edges are all mittered, which simply looks better. The gaps between the drawers are quite small, which makes aligning them a bit more difficult, but in the end it should look better than having such huge slits in the front. The 2 knobs are a topic in themselves. Of course, I also wanted something special, but more on that later. It was quite a lot of work to create this 3-dimensional surface with all the triangles. To make the whole thing look as random as possible, I tried to think as little as possible and simply divide this surface into many small fields. Then I put a point with a random position in each field and connected each corner with this point. Then I simply raised all the points by 3 mm, created the surfaces, connect them and replace them with the smooth surface of the body. After the design was finished, I could start printing all the parts. From Futuro, a filament manufacturer from the Netherlands, was kind enough to provide me with 6 spools of the Galaxy Space Grave PLA for the print, which matches the color of my living room table legs very well. You can find a link to the filament in the description. Be sure to have a look there, they have lots of beautiful filaments which I always like to use. From Futuro produces their filaments in the EU, so it's not shipped halfway across the globe. In addition to the pretty PLA filaments, they also offer a lot of different technical materials. No, I definitely not make a time lapse from this. Let's come back when the print is done. And what can I say, the filament looks really great. It contains a lot of these glitter particles, way more than I know from other brands. By the way, I didn't receive any money for this, just the filament. Many thanks at this point. As I didn't want to risk losing several parts in the event of a misprint, I only printed 1 or 2 large parts at a time. Fortunately, all the prints went absolutely smoothly and I was able to start one print job after the other. After everything was printed, it was time to melt in a lot of heat inserts. I think there are about 80 of them. Of course, I used the only real ones from Stefan from CNC Kitchen. I melt all my heat inserts by hand with a soldering iron. I've thought about building a stealth press, but so far I haven't used so many heat inserts in any of my projects. Maybe I'll do that at some point. The piece of tape here was a marker for a hole that for some reason wasn't deep enough and needed to be adjusted in the design. Once the sides were done, I could make the drawers. The 2 halves are simply pushed together and then screwed to the front with threaded rods. On Amazon I found suitable 400mm self-closing runners in black for the drawers. They were quite oily, which is why I had to clean them first, so they didn't get all the printed parts dirty. Unfortunately, I also made another small mistake. I forgot to drill 2 holes for the heat insert in the smaller front. I simply drilled them myself and assembled the drawers as a test. Unfortunately, as expected, this didn't hold and so I had to print this part again. Of course, I want to reuse the heat insert and it's quite easy to get them out again with a soldering iron.
I am under the water. Please help me.
Well, at least if they are not sitting crosswise in their hole. One heat insert with the threaded rod stuck in it I could just pull out. You can see how bad it holds when there's no hole made for them. The bottom heat inserts, for which I hadn't forgotten the holes, could simply be pulled out with my soldering iron. For the last insert I had to use more radical methods. I fixed the part with a clamp, made a few saw cuts and was then able to break it out with pliers. Hello. And once the new front was printed, I was able to place the heat inserts correctly. Next up were the threaded rods. I was able to determine the correct length in Fusion and cut them to length with my small hacksaw. A millimeter doesn't matter here, it just shouldn't protrude too much at the back. I then used a file to deburr them a little. This meant that almost all the parts were ready. The 4 individual parts of the sides are screwed together first, followed by the pullouts. You can see that the front of the side panel is attached with this plate thing and 2 additional screws. I did this in the hope of minimizing the flexibility in the front area. As my heat inserts were running out, they are attached to the sides with only 2 screws each. As soon as I have new ones, I will probably add 1 or 2 more screws. Next is the other side, which is of course built the same way. Then came the back panel. The 2 parts are simply slotted together and then secured with 4 screws on each side. So completely foolproof for a quick and error-free assembly.
Fuck.
Yeah, maybe you have to screw the part on the right way around, so I went back and turned the back panel over. Once that was done, I connected the base plate with 2 screws. It is fastened on the sides with a total of 8 longer screws. The screws go through the heat insert and cut a few centimeters into the plastic behind it to stiffen the cabinet even more. Then there are 4 rubber feet that I printed from Shore 82A filament and simply snapped them into place. Then only the crossbars are missing. As soon as you have figured out which part belongs where and how, they are also attached with 4 screws each. So the body itself was finished now. The joints on the sides are a little more visible than I hoped. I printed them with a clearance of 0.1 mm, but I might have left this out completely afterwards. Anyway, next up were the 2 drawers. I put 4 M4 threaded rods into each drawer and screw a lock nut with washer onto them. These are then pushed through the entire drawer to create a solid connection between the 3 parts. I screw the rod into the heat insert in the front by hand and then tighten it with a screwdriver. Then just attach the pullouts and that's it. Here you can see that the front has a small cutout in the area where the pullout sits. It is 5 mm deep and I made it so that the pullout cannot move all the way to its end position to ensure that the drawer and its front are always pulled fully onto the carcass with a little force. At this point, by the way, the info that PLA is a plastic that is known for material creep. It therefore yields to stress over a longer period of time and deforms. For this reason, screw connections in PLA can loosen after some time. I only thought of this when the furniture was almost finished and I will probably have to retighten all the screws after a while. If you are printing the furniture, you might want to use PETG for the print. Of course, I wanted to see how the whole thing would fit into the cabinet and whether the joint dimensions were acceptable. The joints weren't perfect yet, but nothing that couldn't be adjusted. What I did notice, however, was that the self-closing mechanism of the drawers is quite strong when you want to pull them out. I may buy another set of pullouts without the self-closing mechanism and replace one of the pullouts per drawer with it. That should reduce the force needed to pull them out. I then aligned the crossbars a little more precisely, but I won't do that on the drawers until the very end. Oh yeah, there's still something missing. Gravel. To prevent the cabinet with its weight in the drawers from tipping forward when it gets pulled out, the 2 containers at the back are filled with gravel. I have gravel with a grain size of 3 to 5 mm for something like this, which I first washed thoroughly so that I can use it here and in future projects as dust free as possible. Here you can see how much dirt comes out of it from this nasty broth. I then let the gravel dry for a few days and wanted to know how many kilograms I was actually tipping into this piece. So I have a total of 4,876 grams. And in the end there were 2,768 grams left over, which means I have an additional 2.1 kilogram of stability in the cabinet.
Nice.
After the gravel, the wooden plate could finally be installed. I marked the screw points and pre-drilled them with 2 mm as acacia wood is quite hard. This is acacia in case I hadn't mentioned that before. I placed the plate on the carcass by hand, making sure there was a slightly larger overhang at the front than at the back. My cordless screwdriver was a great help here when I was fastening the screws because I could only really reach them with these adapters.
By the way, you will find this little piece of furniture for free on my printables profile by the time the video is published. There you will also find a detailed list of the materials required. Before we move on to the next step, the handles, I would like to say that I'm not making any money from this video, as it is my first. But if you want to support me, please have a look at my models on printables. I'm active there for over 5 years now and have uploaded more than 100 designs. In addition to my numerous free models, I also have a few models in the store, such as this multicolor CL415, this station for the Bosch 12 volt tools, which has become a permanent part of my workbench, or this headphone stand. I'll put a link to this stuff in the video description. Now back to the actual topic. Of course, furniture like this also needs some nice handles. I had the idea of casting some out of epoxy resin as a contrast to the 3D print and the wood. I have never worked with epoxy before and have always wanted to do so. My goal is to make a slightly milky white transparent knob with some blue streaks in it. I really hope it works the way I have imagined, but let's see. So first I printed the knobs out of PLA for the mold. Here you can also see a second design that I quickly discarded. In general I tried out several designs, but in the end it turned out to be this first quick attempt. Of course I also printed a mold for the negative out of silicone, and as you can see the first attempt didn't work because I used the wrong filament profile. While the second attempt was printing, I started to fill the molds. I wanted to save myself some sanding work on the resin later, but I don't know if it really was worth the effort. In any case, filling the small parts was quite a mess. I adapted the shape of the knob to the shape of the front so that they sit nicely on the uneven surface. Turns out this could be difficult with the casting, as the top of the casting is naturally flat and I wanted to cast a threaded insert on the uneven back. The knob must therefore face upwards and the mold needs a hole on the underside through which I can hold a threaded insert in position with a screw. The mold for the silicone therefore contains a small pin that will later form the hole for the screw in the silicone mold. I glued the two knobs to the top of the mold with a hard plastic adhesive and was then able to start pouring the silicone. The silicone I have here is already older, so I hoped it would still work. I then mixed in some paint, as this also needs to be used at some point. As the mold would otherwise float, I simply weighted it down with these batteries from my screwdriver. The next day I was able to get the molds out. As this didn't work as easily as expected, I drilled a hole and screwed in a screw to be able to pull them out. I took a few toothpicks from the kitchen to create air channels, thinking that the silicone mold might then be easy to pull out. I still couldn't pull the silicone mold out by hand, so I clamped the screw in my vise and with a little force I got it out. If I had angled the outer walls of the mold slightly, it would probably have been much easier. I don't know why, but the silicone didn't seem to have completely hardened on the mold. At least there was still some goo on the positive mold. If you know why this is and how to prevent it, please let me know in the comments. I then positioned the two heat inserts through the hole with the screw and was ready to mix the resin. I have no idea exactly what kind of resin this is. I just ordered a cheap set on the internet and assumed that it would work. Not like with the white pigment. Unfortunately, this small amount was far too much, and so this attempt is not transparent, which was actually my aim. However, I didn't want to throw the resin away and make it again. I assumed that the first attempt wouldn't turn out the way I wanted anyway, so I carried on to see how it would turn out. Unfortunately, the color didn't work out as well because a large part of it came back to the top. After playing around with it a bit, I left it at that. I removed a few bubbles on the surface with a lighter and then left it to cure overnight. The next day I was able to remove the hardened resin from the silicone mold to give them a nice finish with my wet sandpaper. I was quite happy with the casting, the threaded rods work well and the walls are a little rough but shouldn't need too much sanding. After the knob successfully passed my drop test, I filled a bowl with water to put my sandpaper in. By the way, the first sheet is normal sandpaper in case you're wondering. I started with a 240 grit paper to sand out the roughest part. Unfortunately, I only had 3 more sanding steps as the set of sandpaper I ordered only had 3 different grits instead of the 12 specified. The sanding went quite well, although it was quite difficult to maintain the exact angles of the small surfaces. I'm quite satisfied with the result, apart from not achieving the look I wanted. And so I attached it to the cabinet and see how it looks and what I would like to do differently next time. Obviously the white blue knobs don't really match the rest of the cabinet. As I said, I originally wanted to make them slightly milky transparent with a few blue streaks. So I wasn't completely satisfied with these handles, and so I was very lucky that Justway contacted me at exactly the right moment. At Justway you can easily order the part you need. Be it 3D prints made out of plastic or metal, milled parts from the CNC, injection molded parts and much more. You can simply upload your files and Justway will send them to your home. After I told them about my project, I was invited to order 2 knobs printed from titanium, which arrived in this small package just a few days later. You can find a link to Justway in the video description. Many thanks to Justway for making my handles. And as with the filament, no money was involved. I just received these 2 parts. I was very happy to own a metal 3D print for the first time. With the structure on the inside, I wanted to imitate the design of the air grill of a Mac Pro from Apple. I think the result looks pretty nice. The parts came with this matte finish, and it occurred to me that the polished closed surface would certainly provide a great contrast to the matte 3-dimensional interior. And so I went to my friend Meister Edel, who in addition to his awesome 3D models also makes pretty cool knives. He showed me how to use his belt sander, and so I was able to give the surface a nice shine. We didn't do an absolutely high gloss polish, that would have been a lot more work, but the gloss level we achieved is pretty close and took its time at about 1.5 hours.
Ooh, wow, eh?
Definitely check out his stuff too. You know it already, I'll put a link to it in the description. Afterwards he quickly took a few nice photos. Yes, he can take great photos too. And so I was able to drive home with probably the 2 most beautiful 3D prints I own. And now just take a look at how cool these 2 pieces are. I almost sanded through 2 small areas, but luckily everything went well. Now all I have to do is attach the 2 knobs and it's finished. Looks much better than the resin knobs, right? Last but not least, I replaced the rubber pad with one that is 2 mm higher, as the floor is not completely flat as expected. And then the cabinet was ready to get its place. I quickly threw the piece on a scale and the final weight is 11.8 kilograms. That's more than I expected, so it surely won't tip forward even with fully loaded drawers.
Finally, inner peace.
So, this project is finally complete. Making this video was a lot of fun, and now I would be very interested to know how you like my very first video. Be sure to check out my other designs on printables, take a look at my Saedel stuff, and of course Justway and Form Futura, whose material helped me a lot with this project. Please let me know in the comments what I could do better and what projects you would like to see next. I already have a few ideas and I'm sure that this won't be my last video. So I would really appreciate a subscription and a like for this video, especially for a new channel. This is very helpful. Thank you very much for watching and I hope to see you in the next one. Peace. Ach nee, das macht der Inbox schon.